Hi, welcome to the third part of the Introduction to ASP.NET Web Forms, which is the advanced part. I'm Farhad Eftekari and I'm the teacher of this course. Here are some course links where you can find the material, slides, assignments, tutorial videos, and all the related files related to this course. And here are also some typographical convention we use during the this content and the slides of this course. Make sure to get familiar with them. You're gonna encounter them at the bottom of these slides, and each means something, so it's nice to get to know about them. And here is also difficulty level indicator. Some students would like to just get familiar with basic stuff, and some others would definitely like to dig deeper and find out more about some other materials. So I divided the material into three different level, and it's up to you how deep you want to gain knowledge for this course. And here is also the slides framework. Here's the difficulty level indicator, the title of the slide, the slide number. In this code, if you enter in this URL, then you're going to be redirected to the exact part of the tutorial video according to the slide. Here, the content going to be shown, and then we have the course name, section name, and those convention icons that earlier we talked about. The content of this part, first we're gonna get familiar with namespaces, then go work with master pages, then user controls, and then talk a little bit about ASP.NET page lifecycle, managing the states, navigation controls, validation controls, data controls, web config file, and how to configure your web application, get familiar with exception handling, debugging and tracing, and finally how to publish your website and project. So by definition, ASP stands for Active Server Pages. And namespaces. Well, you may be familiar with namespaces if you earlier worked with other programming languages such as C#, Java, or the other familiar ones. They are some sort of logical groups that act like a container. For instance, their code already been written for different kind of purposes, and you don't need to recreate everything from the beginning by yourselves. There are some kind of classes and code written already based on your needs, based on different kind of scenarios that you may encounter. So by importing them and using them in your project, you are benefiting from previously written codes, and then you can use the functions, methods of those codes. Here are some samples. If you create your page, you may see on the code behind side, we have this using system and then different kind of names for these namespaces. So if you look at the names, you maybe somehow have ideas, some kind of ideas about like what are the purpose of them. So for instance, this using system.web.ui is talking about user interfaces according to this web part. So that's it. And some other languages may use import, and in C# we are using keyword. And you can easily search online and get to know more about different kind of namespaces. Now I'm going to create a sample project in Visual Studio for you to see how we can import other namespaces in our project as well. I'm going to select new project, and then in the list I'm going to select ASP.NET Web application. It's going to take a little bit while for Visual Studio to create the project for us. All right. And now I'm going to add one file here. I'm going to add one web form file, and I'm going to use the default name webform1 for this file, web form file, and now it's going to be added in this list here. Yeah. So if you go to the code behind part, which is webform1.aspx.cs, on the top of the page, on the top of this file, you can see those default namespaces has been added to this file already. So now if I go to the next line and then enter using, I can also enter another namespace, and if I select that, then you can see all of this list of containers for these namespaces as well. Let's select drawing and then see what the other here. So here you can include other namespaces in your file as well if you have to use. Sometimes you are typing something here, some property, and then you can see it's not going to be added. There's some error or something, and maybe Visual Studio gives you some tips that, well, you need to include this namespace in order to work with that method or property or class or whatever it is. So this is the concept of namespaces, and later in your projects you will work with it much more and make yourself familiar. So it's not just about ASP.NET Web Form, it's also similar for other like ASP.NET different projects like MVC, API, Web API, or your Java project or whatever application you are using to simplify the process of coding. Now let's get back to the content and slides that we had. So the next topic is master pages, which is a very beneficial concept in ASP.NET Web Forms. So master pages allows you to create a consistent look and behavior for all the pages or group of pages in your web application. A master page provides a template for other pages with shared layout and functionality. The master page defines placeholders for the content which can be overridden by content pages. The output result is a combination of the master page and the content page. So the whole idea is, imagine you have a structure of your pages, and some parts like headers, footers, menu, they are all the same in all of your pages. So instead of placing them and write the code for all the single page of your application, every single of them like over and over again, you create one master page, and then in the center of that, if the content is changing, then you assign that page to your master page, and then all of this design and layout going to be received from your master page, and then you can modify the content of your pages. By practice also we will work with that. Here is the code of a master page that you have to use, the derivative of the master page on the top of the page, and then the other part of the code. And these content placeholder are some boxes for other pages to fill their content inside of them. So all of the other parts going to be included in all the pages, and this part, the pages can have their own material or content, whatever they're having. So now let's try to create one master page and work with it in practice and see how it works. I right click on the web application and then select add and then select new item. And here we can find, okay, web form master page. There it is. You can name it whatever you want to. I will let it be site 1 as a default. Okay. Now I'm gonna, before this placeholder, make sure to not remove it. Just select it and then select home and then hit enter, and then the blue line you can write whatever you want. For instance, I am coming from, let's see, master page. Top and select it. Bottom. Okay, now I save it, and then I'm gonna add one more web form here. So if you notice, if you go to this list, you can see there are two web forms options you can select. One is web form, which we already created for that namespace example, and the other one is web form with master page. So if I select this one, the next window, it's gonna ask from you which master page you would like to select. And since we only have one master page in this project, you only can select that one. Okay. Now if you notice, this code of your web form is a little bit different comparing to the other web form that you had. It's a whole page, the first one, web form 1 for the earlier example, but the other one, only some weird, not really HTML familiar code to you. So the idea is when you create this master page, it already has HTML tag, head tag, body tag. And here in this head tag, you can see you have one content placeholder. The ID is head. And if you get back to your web form, you can see there is one content placeholder here and there's one here. The first one, the ID is head. So whatever you place here, it's going to be included at the end at this part. And whatever you include here, at the end, it's going to be populated here. So that's the idea. Now we're going to save some content here. And if you go to the design view, you can already see the content of the master page there as well. I am coming from the web form. Now I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to select web form 2 as set as a start page. And I'm going to run the application now, run the project now. It's going to take a little bit while for a Visual Studio to deploy and run it. A little bit more, maybe. All right. Now you can see in this page, which is a very simple example, of course, there's no design or something. Here we see all the content. And as you can see, all of the content from master page, these parts, and from web form, these parts are being shown to us. So it's a very nice opportunity for us to have like different pages. Like imagine you have a company website, you have about page, contact, gallery, products, whatever other pages you have, you are using the same layout, logo, menu part, footer part, your copyright note or whatever you're having, and then your content of the content of the page for each of your pages is going to be changed. So whenever you want to modify the layout, you just go and modify the master page. And that's it. That's going to make it much easier for the developers and designers and everyone to work on the project. So that was the whole idea. But let me just use it in a little bit more complex way. So this one is I'm coming from the web form 2. I'm going to save it. I'm going to edit using the same master page. I'm going to copy paste this text here, but this time this is web form 3. I'm coming from the web form 3. And then save it, run it again. Okay. Now here, web form 2, you can see I'm coming from web form 2, but when I replace it with web form 3, and then you can see I'm coming from the web form 3, but the other parts are the same. All right. We get to the next topic, which is user controls. User controls also have some kind of a similar concept, not identical, not completely, but somehow similar concept to master pages. User controls are for encapsulating markups, controls, and code that you need repeatedly throughout your site. To some extent, they look a bit like server controls in that you can contain programming logic and presentation that you can reuse in your pages. So imagine you have some part of your code or design or whatever logic you are having being used over and over again in your pages. You use user controls. You place them in your pages whenever you want to, and then it's going to be repeated throughout your site. So to use user controls, you have to follow these steps. First, you have to create a panel inside of your page, and then you create a user control, and then set the panel source that user control. We're gonna go through this example together to see how it works. So first, we're gonna have this web form 1 that we already created. I'm gonna add one panel to this page. Right, selecting toolbox, and then in the standard category you can find panel 1. And to make it a little bit organized, first I'm gonna add one folder here, name it UC, stands for user controls, and then inside of this folder I'm gonna add new item, and then I'm gonna find user control. There it is, web forms user control. Okay, I'm gonna use the same default name, web user control 1. I'm gonna save it. I'm gonna have one button here. And then double click on the button, so click event will automatically be added there. Right, so I previously wrote this code before in one of my projects, so I'm gonna copy paste it here and explain it to you and modify it also. First, I'm gonna define and add one string value here. Okay, so here, first I give this path of my user control to this value, and then load this path to this variable as a user control source, and then assign this source to my panel here. So when I click this button, this user control going to be loaded inside of my panel. And consider this that this is just an example of using user controls, and there are like many other examples online which you can search and find for yourself, and they could be quite powerful when it comes to the need of your application. So here's just an example, and now we're gonna run it to see if we encounter any error or something, and then see how it works in this example that I created. I think we have to go to web form number 1. Okay, now we have the button here. So when I press it, here in my panel, now there is nothing inside of that. But when I press it, now this user control gonna be loaded inside of those panel control. Okay, now we need one space here. It's okay. So if I press it again, then it's gonna be loaded again, but we're not gonna see. But here, let's make it a little bit more interesting now that we created this example. I'm gonna create one more user control here, number 2, and then copy paste this text here as well, and then 2, and then get back to my web form number 1. Design mode. I'm going to rename this button to the text of the button to button 1, and then I'm going to add one more button here as button 2, and then I'm going to double click on my button and then use this exact code, but this time for this button user control number 2. And when I run this application now, when I press button 1, you can see that the text from user control number 1 going to be loaded here. And now when I press button 2, then you can see it's 2 now. Again, 1, 2. All right. But like I said, there are other purposes of using web user controls, and make sure if you want to get more familiar with it, go online and search and see what are the other examples. Now let's get familiar a little bit with ASP.NET Page Lifecycle. It's a very important concept because sometimes you are looking for some events to happen during some specific parts of your page lifecycle. So a page lifecycle is the time that the page and the request being sent to the server, it's being loaded, being sent back to you for validation, for postback event handlings, sometimes during the rendering process when the server is rendering your, for instance, user interface or other component of your page. And then at the end of the rendering when it's like unloading process and everything. So you have to make yourself familiar with the concept of page lifecycle to understand at which part of the page lifecycle you're expecting some events to happen. Are you looking for validating something? Are you looking for the exact time that the page is like loading the page for the first time or re-rendering everything? So in that case, it's a bit important for you to understand exactly in which phase. Don't make it a little bit like don't make it complicated for yourself. Based on your needs, you will somehow get more familiar with it. At this point, it's nice for you to know, well, there is this concept of page life cycles and there are these different parts of it, and just be familiar with some concept about this page life cycle. To start with, we have this load part. So during this phase, the control properties are loaded from view state and control state during a postback. For example, when you change the selected item in a drop-down list and then cause a postback, this is the moment where the correct item gets pre-selected in the drop-down list again, which you can then work with in your server-side code. Also during this phase, the page raises the load event. The next one is validation. In the validation phase, the validation controls used to validate user input are processed. And then we have postback event handling. During this phase, the controls in your page may raise their own event. For example, the drop-down list may raise a selected index changed event when the user has chosen a different option in the list. Similarly, a text box may raise the text change event when a user has changed the text before he or she posted back to the server. When all event processing is done, the page raises the load complete event. Also during this phase, the pre-render event is raised to signal that the page is about to render to the browser. Shortly after that, save as state complete is raised to indicate that the page is like saved. Then we have rendering phase. Rendering is a phase where the controls and the page itself output their HTML to the browser. And finally, we have onload. The onload phase is a cleanup phase. This is the moment where the page and controls can release resources they were holding on to. During this phase, the onload event is raised so you can handle any cleanup you may need to do. Alright, now let's talk about managing a state in an application. There are different ways you can manage a state. Imagine there are times that you like to store some information, having some interaction with your users based on their actions, whatever information they are providing, or if you want to see a user going through your website or web application, somehow having some kind of defined actions for a certain user. There are different ways you can store the state of your application for that certain user that then later in your application you can use in order to respond to that certain user. We have sessions, we have cookies, we can use cache or application values and variables that we can define in our application in order to globally use for our all of our users. So we will talk about each of these different ways to manage the state to make it, ourselves more familiar with those methods. And they seem a little bit maybe tricky at first, but when it comes to your application based on your needs, at this point it's nice to get familiar with them to see they exist. You can use them. So let's one by one try to get familiar with them. The first one is session. Session is used to store per user information for the current web session on the server. It also supports using a database server as a back-end store. Uh, by using sessions, you are somehow creating a tunnel with your certain users and your application. It means that I call you and you pick up the phone and the phone is on our hand and then we are doing our everyday life and whenever we need to communicate with each other we can use the session until the call is connected. So the session is being used in that way. You can based on this example you can see you can write a session like this and then name it whatever you want and then assign some value to it. And then if you want to read it later in your application, you can have access to it with that certain user, with that certain name that you assigned to it earlier. And then if you want to get rid of your session, you can easily write session.remove and then that session name that you already assigned to that. The other method is using cookies. Cookies should be used to store per user information for the current web session on the client. Therefore, client has control over the contents of a cookie. So you can use cookies, and in most of the browsers, it's been enabled to use that, but it's nothing to be like certain about. Some developers use the combination of sessions and cookies. It's nice to know that they exist. You can use them. The thing is, sessions store the information on the server's memory, but cookies are being stored in your user's browser. And here is the sample code that you can use in order to write, read, or remove and check if a cookie exists in your user's browser or not. By writing response.cookie and then the name of the cookie that you assign, and then that value, you can assign a value to that cookie, and then you have to set the expire time and date of that cookie. For instance, here you can see datetime.now.addDays1. It means assign the expired date 1 day after date.now. The interesting thing about removing a cookie is there is no like response.cookie name.remove, but you can set the expire date to the earlier time. In that way, you are removing a cookie. So it's a little bit tricky and different, but it's a way that's going to be used. And by reading a cookie, you can simply just write request.cookies and then your cookie name and then the value that you assign for that. And to check if a cookie exists or not, you can simply use request.cookie and then the name of the cookie and then check if it's null or not. You can also use cache in order to store and manage states. Cache object is shared between users in a single application. Its primary purpose to cache data from a data store and should not be used as a primary storage. So sometimes you are caching some information. For instance, imagine uh, you have a huge information list of information in your database and every hour you're updating your information in your database. So when a user comes and log in or visit your website, you want to show some filtered information on the page. So you are getting this information from the database, analyzing your tables, and then show that certain information to users on certain times. So you know that for an hour, those uh, values and information are valid, and you don't need to search for that on your database anymore. It's a question of performance. So you put those information in cache, and then you can set some expire date for that, and then all of the users that come and visit your website, when the cache is valid, they just see those information without your application going to your database and analyzing those rows of information again. So cache can be used very handy, and then cache is being shared with all of the users in your application. And here is a sample code on this link that you can get to know more about it. It's a bit advanced topic, nothing in the span of introduction to ASP.NET Web Forms, but it's nice if you want to get to know more about it, go and find out by yourself. And then we have application variables you can use. Application object is shared between users to store application-wide state and should be used accordingly. For instance, you would like to set some global variables to be shared for all of your users. For instance, uh, if you recall, when you're logging to some applications, then you can check remember me, and then the application will remember you for certain days or hours. And there are some cases that you want to change that days more often in your application. So in that way, you can define an application variable and then set those values of days or hours in your application. And usually you write that on your global file. And here is the way you can write it: application, name of the value, name of the variable, and then assign some value to it. And also by reading that, you can also check first if it exists, and then see if those value exists or not, or the purpose of your application that you're creating that variable to it. Now let's find out what's the difference between absolute and relative URL. If you look at this link here, you can see there's HTTP keyword here, which is a protocol that we are using on web. Here it's an absolute URL. When you have the full URL here for your image source or your for link that you want to place in your page or somewhere. And then we have this relative URL here, as you can see, dot dot, and then a slash image as a slash image1.png. So this URL, when you are creating your web pages, when the user is browsing through your website, the browser will populate this URL based on this current location of the page that you're having. So it means go one step backward, and then there's one folder named images there, and then there's one file here, image1.png. And in ASP.NET Web Forms, we have this sign here. When we place this sign, it means go to the main and root folder of the project and then find images and then image1.png. So the solution was here to get rid of this problem of finding the right folder no matter where you are from, and like having this problem of finding that if you are some page inside of a category or folder somewhere. So by this you exactly know where you are pointing at, and when you're like finding your file, that's where you're finding it. But here in this example, we're going to go through and work with this example here. I'm going to create one folder named images here, images, and I'm going to create one folder as the name pages. And here I'm going to add one file and name it something. Be careful, it has to be a web form file if you are using that sign. I'm gonna call it page 1. Very innovative with the name of the pages I was so far. Okay, now I'm gonna place one image control there. Okay. And in this images folders, I'm gonna put this tech class.png file that I previously made ready on my desktop. There it is. So now let's first, as an image URL, I'm gonna put it like tech class.png. Let's see what it does when I open it. Notice that this file is in this pages folder and my image is in this images folder. So I'm just writing tech class.png. I'm going to select this page as my start page. You can right click on a page and then select set as a start page. So when you are running your application or project, then that's the page that's being run at first. Right, as you can see, nothing is being loaded here. There is an image here, but obviously it has no correct URL. So now I'm gonna put /images and then let's see what happens. There it is. This is my image. And when I look at the source, where was it? Here you can see this is the source file. So it's going one step backward and then find this images folder and then this file. But now let's use that sign. Right. So it means go to the root folder, find images folder, and then tech class. No matter what directory you are, what file you are, it goes to the root and then find the images folder and then that file. Let's see if it works, which definitely will. There it is. And when we look at the source, see that it populated this link based on the location and everything by itself. So it's much better to rely on ASP.NET Form to figure that out for you. Now let's get familiar with navigation controls. We have menu, sitemap path, tree view, and here is the first one. When we want to use the menu control, we use it to do the following. Develop both statically and dynamically displayed menus for your ASP.NET web pages. And here in this link you can find the properties, methods, and events. So now you have a very nice knowledge. You gain a very efficient knowledge so far that you can also go and drop this control on your page and go to this link and read more about the properties, methods, and events of this control. And here is also the necessary code that if you place it like on your page from this toolbox on the left side or wherever you place it, this code will populate it for you at some part of it, and then well, starts with ASP menu, of course, and then there's the ID for that, and run at server, and then the items of the menu can be shown here as well. And also we have this properties visible that can be set to true or false, and then items of the menu. We can also place it to have a little bit more idea about working with this control. First I'm going to stop the ongoing running project, and then there's this navigation tab here. So if I just drag and drop it here, then you can see it's going to be added here. And then we have edit menu, items, where you can add items here, and then there are specific properties you can work with. If you want to place an image here, you can set the image URL. If you're like using it as a link to other pages, you can use this navigate URL property, and the other related properties if you are placing a text for that certain item you're having, and the others. And then we have this tree view control, which is very similar to menu, just the way it shows is a little bit different. To display hierarchical, right in the very weird way here, such as a table of contents in a tree structure in a web page. And then here we have all the properties, methods, and events also here. And here is the code that we can use in order to place in our pages, or just drag and drop it there from this navigation tab of the tool. And same as a menu, it has visible property, and instead of items we have nodes. So for each item we call them node, and then we can have access to them, we can modify them, we can add new one. There are certain and specific controls on ASP.NET Web Form to do the validation job when you're user inserting some values on some sort of forms. We can use these validation controls in order to validate the data and input that we are receiving from our visitors and users. Let's get familiar with them, and let's use them in some kind of sample page to have a better understanding. So to name them, we have required field validator, we have compare validator, range validator, regular expression validator, and custom validator. And then at the end we have validation summary, which is the list of and summary of the all validated status of these validation controls that we use. And yeah, let's try them together. I'm going to remove these two controls here. I'm going to place one text box here, and also one label. Where is the label? Here. Okay. And then I'm going to place one button here. So we have this validation tab here. So first of all, I'm going to use this required field validator. And also I'm going to name the text box name. And then the button to submit. So when you click on that, you can see also there are so many properties here. What we are looking for first is control to validate. And there's only one control to validate here, which is text box name, based on this page that you're having. And then we have text here. All right. And I'm going to put one label here. I'm going to set the text to form got submitted. And then the visibility to false. So when someone click the button, label 2 dot visible will be set to true. Now let's see how it works. All right. Now I don't put anything here in this text box and just press submit. Enter this error here, which I pause the video and then search for the article, a specific article for that, and overcome this issue. I found this article here in a Stack Flow, which somehow declares for a specific .NET versions that we are using. They don't let this validation to be happen based on some like HTML5 validation and like security reasons and everything. You can also search by yourself with this error that you encountered if you're like encountering with the same error. But it turns out if you go to this web config file of the project, and then you need to add this little code here in order to make it work. In the next chapter, we're gonna get familiar with the .config file. I'm gonna talk more about this file, but for now, if you encounter that error, all you need is to add this part of code to your web config file, and it will work for the project. So at this point, this is now important. And then let me reload this page again. Now we have name here. So when I press submit, it tells us please enter your name, and it doesn't let the application to go further and do the other task until you provide the validated information here. So I'm going to write my name and then press submit. As you can see, no other error going to be shown to us, and then form got submitted. Now let's change the structure of this form a little bit to work with other validation control. Definitely when you're creating some kind of account in some websites, you have to enter your password twice just to make sure you're entering something that you know what is that. So here we can create this password and retype password labels and text boxes here. So I have password 1 and password 2 text box control. I will make this control stay here, but I need to do a little bit change. First of all, I'm going to select this text box password 1, required field validator, and please enter your password. Just for you to see, we can have multiple validator controls in a single page. Compare validator. All right. So now definitely we have to select two controls. Control to compare, control to validate. And then we have this text. Please enter same password. Right. Everything fine. Okay, let's start. Let's run the application and let's see if it's working. All right, first I'm going to submit the form. So we can see here, please enter your password. My password, oh, I forgot to select it as a password type, but doesn't really matter. And then if I submit it, let's see what happened. That was interesting. Okay. Selected opposite, but I'm sure it's not going to be the reason. Textbook password 1, textbook password 2. Let's see. Okay, that was really strange. So the reason was control to validate must be the first one, and control to compare must be the second one. The terms is right, yeah, but I expected that to be like somehow the same, but yeah. Now let's run the application again. Let me enter like same values, and then you see that it's gonna pass this validation process and move on. And when I submit, now it works. Okay. I'm gonna clean up a little bit. Now I'm gonna add this website label here with text, and then I'm gonna have my text box ID as text box website, and then I'm gonna add one different validator, regular expression validator. Let me select it as email, which is more common to use instead of website in registration forms and everywhere. Okay. Right. So now let's see. Please enter a valid email address. Okay, now we have the property here, validation expression. When you select it, there are many things that you can validate. So we select internet email address, and then there's this expression here, which pre-created for us to use. We can also come up with this kind of validation expressions for more deeper validations. But if you search online, you will find thousands of articles about it. Okay, now let's run the application. Oh, I forgot to select which control to validate. Control to validate, and then text box email. It's really good that it shows us this kind of error messages for us to have a hint and to fix it. Okay, now I'm gonna just write some text here, press submit, and then it says please enter a valid email address. So if I just enter like here, it's also still not valid. And then my email at yahoo.com, and then submit, it gets submitted. Simple as that. Now we got to these data controls that we're gonna get familiar with. Before we start this part of the course, well, it's a very advanced topic, but I included for students to be familiar with. the concept of data source controls and data controls, but don't worry, we're not going to use them in our like project and assignments. But it's really nice to get familiar with and know that these kind of data controls exist and what are the purpose of them and how we can use them. Here are data source controls, the ones that get access to our databases, whatever source they are, and have this connectivity from our application to this data source. We have several data source controls, like access data source control, which is obvious that get connected to access, and then sitemap data source and SQL data source, which are usually being used more often, and then XML data source control. So if you go to the project and then from toolbox, we can find them here in data tab, and then we have these source controls here. Make sure to read about them, and if you wanted to learn more, there are like tons of articles online which tell you how you can use them and have access to them. And then we have data controls. So data source control provide you the data, and then you can place this data and these data controls to show to your users and visitors. We have data list control, details view control, form view control, and then we have grid view control and repeater control. There are also some description text here you can get to know more, and then you can use online material to know how to work with it. And then they're also in data tab here, and then you can just use them and place them on your page and try to work them if you are interested to get to know more about them. Alright, now let's talk about configuring your web application. ASP.NET enables you to specify configuration settings that affect all web applications on a server, that affect only a single application, that affects individual pages, or that affect individual folders in a web application. You can make configuration settings for features such as compiler options, debugging, user authentication, error message display, connection strings, and more. And here are all different category of this configuration that we can use, like compilation, custom errors, authentication and rules, connection strings, custom values, and the others. So when you want to select which version of .NET Framework will be used for compiling your application, it's by this part of the code, which is in your web config file. So when you create your application, there is one file in your root folder of the application, which the name is web.config. So all of this configuration can be stored here in this file, which is the XML file, and the way we write it is also based on this XML type. So here you can select like which edition of which version is the framework of the application, .NET framework that we are using for our application. And then we can also select, have some kind of configuration for custom errors. So definitely you encounter situations going on the websites and then encountering some custom errors. They are not like programmatical errors that needs to be shown to the developers for them to give some hint about some errors or problem they were encountering when they are like using the application. So you can make it a little bit user friendly for your users, and for different error code you can define a page or some kind of configuration that you can send and redirect your users to that certain page. And also you have to place them in web config. And there are three types of custom errors, which you can select the mode for the way that's going to be shown to the users, and you can define them on your web config. As you can see here, custom error mode, remote only, here it is, but you also have on and off, which also here fully explained to you. So one mode is we show the technical information of the error, which is good for a staging mode. When we are like developers are creating the websites, they have to see what happened, what went wrong in the application that causes these errors. But when we are showing to our users, then we definitely set that to like not being shown to the user. And also there are situations that when users from some other servers outside of the server that actually is hosting the application, having access to the application, for them we don't show the technical error. But for our developers that running the application on that current server, browsing with the browsers on that current servers, we show them the actual technical error. So this is where this remote only comes from. And then we can also select the authentication mode and different roles, which is also a very advanced topic. But it's good to know that we also can authenticate our users when we have these membership parts of our websites by these features. And also we can define our connection strings in web config. So throughout our application, whenever we are using these data sources, we can use this predefined connection string, and then without placing them over and over in all the pages, and then for modifications, it's going to make it much easier for ourselves to take care of that. And also we can define custom values in our web config. So throughout our applications, we can also use these custom values whenever we need it to. Now I would like to talk about the concept of exception handling, debugging, and tracing. First, I would like to talk about types of errors that we encounter in our application in runtime and whenever like someone is using the application. So we have syntax error, that's the errors that are caused by typos, missing keywords, and otherwise incorrect code. So they are really easy to notice because when you are compiling the application or saving your files, especially when you are using IDEs such as Visual Studio, those applications easily give you a hint or stop your process of doing whatever you're doing, that please fix this issue first and then move on. And then we have logic errors, which are much harder to notice and fix because if you are not planning well the application you are creating based on the logic you are having, you may encounter something in the application that seems like it's working, and your ID and when you're compiling the application, the doesn't give you any kind of hint or stop sign or error sign or anything. So application may seems like it's working fine, but it's not, and then you're like the outcome or whatever you're receiving is not the one that you're expecting. So you have to go through your code and then try to find these logic errors in your application. And then we have runtime errors, errors that cause the application to crash or behave unexpectedly at runtime, which also are quite easy to solve. And also we have this catching and handling code that we can use in our code behind files. So whenever we are dealing with some very sensitive stuff like working with database, connecting to the database, if you go deeper by yourself with working with databases with your SPDOT applications, you may see that you have to enable a connection to a database. You set the connection to open and then uh, do whatever you want to do with the database, and then at the end you have to close it. But sometimes during the way application crashes and your connection would be open for a while, which is not a very good practice in working with databases when you're working with your application. So when you are opening the connection and doing whatever you are doing with your database, and then you can use this code as some sort of way to somehow manage these situations. So what it does whatever you put it here as some sort of a normal code, and then whatever error or stuff that catches and encounter during the way, the application will the your project will go through this final part as well. So when you're opening a database connection, for example, and then do whatever you want to do, and then at the end you include closing your connection, so the application will make sure that this part of the code also has been uh, go through as well, whatever exception is like encountering during the way. And also let's try this debugging tools and debugging features with Visual Studio ID as well. I'm gonna open the project once again. It's gonna take a little bit while. All right. So if you remember that example that we are having for validating controls, we had a button and we had a text box there as well. Right. Now I'm gonna change some stuff here a little bit. So we have this success message. All right. I'm gonna create an integer value and call it age. Set the initial value to 0, and then I'm gonna assign the value that we enter for age. In that certain text box. Okay. And then label to text would be the age you entered is yeah, of course you could just simply assign this text here, but I just wanted to write some code for you to see. In the middle of the process you can also stop that and everything. I'm gonna run the code. I'm gonna run the project, not the code. Okay, so now if I insert some value here, oh, we also still have that validation control there, so I'm going to remove that as well and run it. Okay, so now let's enter 15 here and then press submit. The age you entered is 15. Okay, now I want to show you something. Let's pause here. And now I'm going to run to press the submit button again. When I press it, it comes and then go through all of these lines and then it stopped here because I pointed out my mouse pointer here and I clicked. So there's this red circle here. It means that when you get to this line, stop the application and just wait for my command. So now you can see here when I mouse over with this age variable here, it tells me age is 15. But it was age 0 at first, and then get this text box age here. And now I can go through the code and I can set and I can like check these values if some issue is happening before it gets to some lines that encountering the issue. So it's a very powerful and practical tool, especially when you're working like in advanced level with your applications, you definitely gonna encounter situations that you can get the best out of this feature. And if you wanna continue and then go to other lines, you just need to press continue and then it continues. And then also you can have multiple uh, circles here as well. So now the age is 15. Now I'm gonna enter 10. So when I press submit, at first age is 0. But when I press continue, it goes to this line and now age is 10 because text box value was 10. Very interesting feature. Make sure to get familiar with it, and then later definitely you will use it. After developing your project, you need to publish your website or project somewhere, and there are several methods to use in order to publish your project. We're gonna discuss them individually and then somehow see in Visual Studio ID how we can use these methods in order to publish our project. First one is file system. We can publish our project in some kind of directory containing all of the files, compiled DLLs and everything. And then we have the option of using FTP file transfer protocol, which we need to define a username and password and FTP URL in order to publish our website or project there. And then we have web deploy, and also we have the option of publishing our project in a cloud system named Azure, which is for Microsoft. Let's see, let's go to Visual Studio. When you go to your project and right click on that, you can see there is an option here, publish. When you click on that, there's going to be several options to choose. Based on the addition of the Visual Studio, they vary. The look and user interface will be definitely different, but the concept would be the same. So here you can see that you can create a profile, and then later you can just by selecting that profile do the same task, but without defining everything again. So here you can see if you select file system, you can select a folder, and then all of the project will be published there, and then you can copy paste it on your server or wherever you are want to host your project or application. Then we have this FTP option, which you need to define the server address, which starts usually with FTP instead of HTTP and HTTPS. And then your username and password need to be provided. Then you have the option of web deploy package here. In some web hosting plans, you can deploy it and then upload your package, and then they will extract it and then run your application. And then you have the option of web deploy. So here it is, and then you can just move on, go to the next level and do it. But it's a bit advanced concept and topic, but it's not that big a deal, and I'm quite sure once you finalize a project, then you will be easily able to publish your project there as well. And here are some links if you are interested to get more knowledge about these specific topics. And here it was the whole advanced part of this course that we were studying, Introduction to ASP.NET Web Forms. And I hope you had a wonderful class and enjoy this course as well. Make sure to go on the portal and then work on the quiz, project, and assignments in order to finish and pass this course. Thank you for your consideration, and bye.